for that welcome. J.D. Jance's head is already beginning to swell. Anybody else with a question? Yes, right?
I think J.P. Beaumont is my favorite character that you write about, and how do you visualize? I mean, size, tall, I kind of have it in my head, but do you visualize him as a certain look?
How, I deliberately don't give a lot of
Thought to that?
physical description to him. He's handsome and doesn't know it, which makes him really appealing. He's learning his way around women, but it's taken him a very long time. And so I leave that open so people can fill in the blanks, and you have done so. You have your blank filled in exactly the way you want it. And when people ask me who would I want to have be J.P. Beaumont in film? Well, for one thing, Hollywood has never come knocking. Well, they've come tapping. But they always want to have the whole series, option the whole series for this much money, and I always say no. At some point, they will produce a movie called J.P. Beaumont, the Musical. But my grandkids are the ones who will be signing that contract. J.A. Jance will not be involved.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, blue shirt. No.
When's your next Joanne Brady book?
Pardon?
Your next Joanne Brady?
Well, the next Joanna Brady is not on the horizon yet, because Joanna and her jurisdiction is going to appear in the next Walker book called Blessing of the Lost Girls, which will be out in September. And actually, I'm going to be talking about that here, so you'll know. But when I started in Desert Heat, that wonderful scene, the first scene in the first book in the series is where Joanna and her mother Eleanor and her daughter Jenny are all in the same room. And they're waiting for Andy to come home so Andy and Joanna can go out to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. Jenny is 9. She has just had some sex education at Greenway School. And she has counted on her fingers, and there aren't quite enough months between her birthday and their anniversary. And she says to her mother, in her grandmother's presence, "Mom, was I a preemie?" Well, of course, she was not a preemie. She was on time. It was the wedding that was late. But that conversation sets the stage for the conflict between Joanna and her mother that runs all the way through the series. And I don't know how J.A. Jance did that. I don't think she was planning for it to happen. So in Desert Heat, Jenny was 9 years old. She is now a senior at Northern Arizona University, studying criminal justice, and she is deeply involved in the investigation that occurs in the upcoming Walker book called Blessing of the Lost Girls. So, the Brady people will be back, but not as at front and center of that book, although Jenny is. Any other questions?
I have a question, but I can't think of the new lady that is up in Alaska that drives the Jeep that is so awesome. Where did you find her?
I have no idea. That character, Twinkle Winkleman, absolutely walked away with nothing to lose. And I'm currently writing a novella if you're gonna ask the question, you have to let her pay attention to the answer now, come on. So I'm currently writing a novella called Girls' Night Out, which features Twinkle Winkleman. She's in Alaska. I've been to Alaska on cruises. I don't know enough about Alaska to write a whole novel, but I figured I could write a novella. So, are you involved? Do you get my newsletter?
Yes.
So, okay, when Girls' Night Out comes around, you'll know. Twinkle Winkleman, she was supposed to be a one-off character in Nothing to Lose. And I thought she would be there for that one day and then she'd be gone. Well, she wouldn't go away. She hung around for the whole damn book, right up to the crashing climax. You know, what would Bo have done without her? But as soon as I thought of the name, Twinkle Winkleman, it made me laugh. And then my husband is a gearhead. So we watched every episode of Wheeler Dealers there ever was. And in their last season, they bought and revived an International Harvester Travelall, white and yellow. It had shag carpeting inside it. They got rid of that. But I was just fascinated because I never knew that International Harvester made anything but tractors. So as soon as I thought of Twinkle Winkleman, I knew that was the kind of car she would drive. And she just turned up and walked away with that book. And she's the one character, minor character, that people keep asking you, are you gonna bring her back? So yes, I am. I'm working on her novella right now, and I expect HarperCollins will pick it up. No other questions? Okay, fair enough. He was just touching his eyebrow. I thought it was a question. If this had been an auction, he would have bought something. We arrived at Apache Junction at 2:30 for a 3 o'clock event. And the room was already standing room only. There were people all the way around the room. So I told the people at the library, my host, I said, look, I don't want to turn people away. If anybody else comes, obviously the this city library, I'm surprised the fire department didn't come and shut us down. But I said, tell them if they'll wait, if they can come back in an hour, I'll do one program, a signing, and then after the signing, I'll do another program. So quite a few people stayed for the second feature, and that was really gratifying because after 3 years of not talking to real people, I really missed it. By the way, you may have noticed me tottering through here. After 3 years of wearing nothing but Skechers, I'm trying to get my sandal sea legs back. And I woke up on the 1st of January, and I thought, holy smoke, I'm going to be out in public. Do you know how thin your hair is? I went straight out and bought a wig. You'll notice I'm not wearing it. I wore it for a Zoom event. And I swear to God, it looked like I was wearing a tinfoil bathing cap. So I finally said, get with it, Judy, you're 78 years old. Own it and look it. So yes, there's a question over there.
What do you do for the discipline and creativity?
Okay, I can't hear a word. Please come up a little closer so I can.
For the creativity and discipline of writing, what helps you with that?
Well, at this point of my life, when I am the primary caretaker for my husband who has health issues, when I have two dachshunds who refuse to be housebroken. You know, there's a doggy door.
Oh, I know.
I let them out, they come back in and pee on the pee pad. The one dachshund had a back injury. So the house came with a doggy door and they had larger dogs. So the lip of the doggy door is taller than JoJo's legs. And I don't want her leaping in and out for fear she'll re-injure her back. That was a $13,000 Christmas present we gave each other, but you know, in 6 years later, it's down to only about $225 a month. You just have to advertise it long enough. So, as primary caregiver and primary doggy door in our family, the way I keep creativity flowing is to go outside and walk 10,000 steps a day. Because that's when I'm outside, that's when my mind doesn't have to think about anything concrete. I count the laps because I know how many steps are in a lap. I have a 250 laps, so I just have to count to 4 to know I hit 1,000. And by the way, I've been walking 10,000 steps a day. I am at, I think, a 479-day streak right now. I don't know.
Welcome, everyone. If you want to turn your cell phones on silent so we don't have any disturbances during the event. Hello, my name is Tracy Skousen. I'm the director for the R.H. Johnson Library. Today, the library is pleased to present author J. Jance. With over 21 million copies of her books in print over a career spanning 4 decades, New York Times best-selling author J. Jance is the author of the Ali Reynolds series, with Collateral Damage being the most recent, the J.P. Beaumont series, Joanna Brady series, and a series of Southwestern thrillers featuring the Walker family, a volume of poetry, and more. Born in South Dakota and brought up in Bisbee, Arizona, she lives with her husband in Seattle. Please welcome J. Jance.
January, when it was cold and rainy and snowy and icy in Seattle, I kept thinking about being in Arizona in March. And all I can say is, so far, so good. I believe there's more rain coming. I was down in Tucson last weekend for the Tucson Festival of Books. And I flew in on Thursday, and overnight, Wednesday night, they had 3 inches of snow in Tucson. So I was quite astonished to check in at the Arizona Inn and find a snowman on the croquet court. But by the next evening, all the snow was gone, and it was a wonderful weekend in Tucson. But I have a feeling this late moisture in the desert is going to give you folks a wonderful year for wildflowers. And I'm sort of cranky that I'm missing that. I'm a little too early for the flower bloom, but as I walked from my room out to the car this morning, I did get my first whiff of orange blossoms, so that was good. But how many people in this room read my blog? But there are many of you not married. Okay, you guys, shape up. When I was attending the University of Arizona, it was 100 miles from Tucson to Bisbee. My mother had 4 additional kids still at home. She never had a mechanical dishwasher. She always had human dishwashers. She never had a clothes dryer. She always hung the clothes on the line. She always washed on Monday, ironed on Tuesday. So although she was still very busy, and she cooked 3 meals a day without benefit of a microwave, but although she was very busy, every Tuesday morning, she would sit down and write me a long letter telling me what had been going on the previous week. And so my blog posts every Friday. I've been writing a blog for close to 15 years now, I think, right around that anyway. And I consider it my weekly letter to my friends, my fans, and it's sort of a window on my life. Sometimes it talks about growing up in Bisbee and growing up in a family of 7. Sometimes it talks about the writing process, because that's what I do. Writing is my life. And sometimes it talks about the tour. Sometimes it's, I have a funny story about a phone call coming in from my mother while I was doing a book signing. We'll see if I have time for that one. But my blog posts every Friday, jajance.com/blog. And one of the more recent entries was about the blizzard of 1949, because our family moved from South Dakota to Arizona just on the front edge of that series of blizzards that shut down the Midwest for months, with huge snow drifts and with transportation absolutely stalled completely. And we left the farm on the 28th of January. It was 28 degrees below zero in Marvin, South Dakota when we left. I don't remember that. I do not remember the 5 days we were snowbound in Enid, Oklahoma. I'm sure my folks remembered that vividly. What I remembered was the day, 6 weeks later, that we moved into the house on Yuma Trail in Bisbee, Arizona. And I remember hanging on the uprights of the fence. There was an ornamental fence around the yard. And I remember hanging on it and looking up at the clear blue sky and feeling the sun all over my body. And that's my first conscious memory. And that's the beginning of my love affair with Arizona. I've never gotten over it. Somebody asked me this week, well, we sold our Tucson house just before the pandemic. And somebody said, well, don't you miss Arizona? I said, yes, every year from November to April. Collateral damage. We're here to talk about collateral damage. What a book. It is the first book out of 64. The only book out of 64 books that ever took me a whole damn year to write. From March of 21 to March of 22. Usually I write a book, usually it takes about 6 months. That's how I've been writing novels since 1982. And Blessing of the Lost Girls will be number 65. So you can tell I've written more than one book a year for most of those 40 years. You can do the math, it's probably more specific than that, but that math isn't my thing. So it usually takes from beginning to end, beginning being starting on page 1, writing the manuscript, editing the manuscript, submitting it, and then re-editing it according to the publisher's wishes, and having it ready for production. That's usually about a 6-month process. That was not true of Collateral Damage. I started writing and it just didn't seem to want to work. And I wrote about a third of the book. And then I turned to my husband. Now my husband, Bill, is a retired electronics engineer. Some of you may remember the gray brick phone from Motorola. Weighed about 5 pounds, I think, holding that thing up to your ear. In 1968, My husband was working in the advanced science division at Motorola, and they brought him a piece of brick-shaped balsa wood and said, "This is the shape of the first cell phone. Build a radio to go inside it," which he did without benefit of integrated circuits. He and his team built that phone, and it didn't go on sale to the public until 1986. You may have seen this commercial on TV. This guy comes waltzing into the room and he says, "When I invented the cell phone for Motorola in 1968, it's all I can do to keep from throwing things at the screen." He worked in marketing. He didn't do any of the design work. That guy is a liar, and I want you to know that he didn't do it. But Bill is a retired electronics engineer now, and what do engineers do? They fix things. So Bill has morphed from being an electronics engineer into being a literary engineer. And when I'm up against it, he's the guy I turn to. I was writing an earlier Allie Reynolds book, Deadly Stakes. And I was almost to the end. I was on the banana peel. I should have been able to finish that book. And I couldn't make it happen. So I gave Bill the manuscript and I said, "Would you please read this and tell me how to finish it?" So he did. And then he looked at me and he said, "Well, why don't you do it the easy way?" So I did. That's all he said. "Why don't you do it the easy way?" And I'm not going to tell you what I did. If you want to find out what the easy way was, you can go back and reread Deadly Stakes. Another time, he was sitting, I don't have an office. I have long thighs. If you have a lap, you could just as well use it. So I write on my laptop on my lap. And despite spending every day of my life on the keyboard, I've had no issue with carpal tunnel because my wrists are always supported by my thighs. So my office is the left-hand chair in the family room. Bill's chair is the right-hand chair in the family room. He watches TV while I work. Now, that's not a problem for me because he mostly watches Escape to the Country, and there's not much plot to take your mind off working. But I grew up in that family of 7 kids, and we all did our homework around the kitchen table while our mother, Evie, was fixing dinner. So I can work in a certain amount of chaos. So one day I was sitting there with my computer open on my lap. And Bill says, "You know, AI is pretty interesting. You should write a book about AI." I looked at him and I said, "Are you talking to me? I'm a liberal arts major. What do I know about AI?" So he started giving me scientific articles about AI to read. He maintains that I have a whirring blender in my head. And stuff comes into my head, however it comes in, eye, ear, nose, whatever. After it goes through the blending process, the way it leaks out through my fingertips is completely changed. So he fed me all of that scientific stuff about AI. And what came out the other end was Frigg. Frigg is High Noon Enterprises' pet artificial intelligence. She was created to be the partner of a wannabe serial killer. And so her deep learning was all about doing things she's not supposed to do. So she was trained to color outside the lines. I wrote the book about her. Let's see, it was Men Overboard. And at the time, my editor was a technophobe who only used her BlackBerry, probably up until the time last year when they finally abolished BlackBerries. And when I turned that manuscript into her, I thought she was going to run into Frigg, throw it over her shoulder and say, we want our money back. Well, that didn't happen. She finished reading the manuscript. At the end of Clawback, I had pulled the plug on Frigg, and she was gone. My editor finished reading the manuscript, and she called me up and she said, don't kill Frigg. You can't kill Frigg. So Frigg is back. Like the Big Lebowski, Frigg abides. And she gives a lot of humor in the book, because no matter what, she can't quite grasp idiomatic English. So when Stu says to her in sort of exasperation, what does that have to do with the price of peanuts? She immediately starts giving him peanut futures. That's just how she's built to work. So if you want to know where Frigg came from, it came from the chair just to the right of me. So I was completely exasperated with Collateral Damage. I had written a third of it, and I handed it to Bill, and I said, would you please read this and tell me what you think? Well, he had it for a rather long time. Finally, he handed it back to me, and he said, and this is a direct quote, this is a mess, I can't read it. Not only is he an honest man, he is also a very brave one. And I have learned to trust his opinion. So I tried to read what I had written, and he was right. It was a mess. Do you remember that old Sunday school song, "The wise man built his house upon the rock"? Well, Collateral Damage, the way I had written the first third, was built on sand. That was why it wasn't going anywhere. It was a third of the book in, and we knew the bad guy had done stuff, but we hadn't met him yet. We didn't know who he was. And when I say we hadn't met him, I mean the reader hadn't met him, and neither had the author. So I had to go back to square one and do a complete rewrite. My process for writing books, I write murder mysteries, so I better start with somebody dead, right? So Collateral Damage starts with a homicide in St. Paul, Minnesota, when the director of a domestic violence shelter is gunned down on the steps of the shelter on Halloween night. And the next thing we know, it's several years later, and we meet a guy named Frank Munoz, who has just been let out of the slammer after doing the better part of 20 years he's a former police officer who went to prison on federal corruption, money laundering charges. And he spent the whole time he was in prison planning on getting even with the people who sent him up. You know, these days, we hear, and so there are a series of homicides. One, I'm sorry, wrong direction. One is in St. Paul, Minnesota. Then there's another one in California. And then on the 1st of January, Allie's husband, B. Simpson, is on his way from Sedona to Sky Harbor to fly to London for a cybersecurity meeting, when their vehicle is forced off the highway in what is first thought to be an accident, but is eventually discovered to be attempted vehicular homicide. And the guy from the Department of Public Safety, who's supposed to be investigating this case, takes the line of least resistance, and he says, okay, two guys are in the vehicle. There's the shuttle driver, this old guy who's the shuttle driver, and then there's this high-flying executive. Who do you think is the target? It's not going to be the shuttle driver. And furthermore, who's going to be the prime suspect? Well, that has to be the wife, because it's always the wife. So Allie and Frigg and the people at High Noon say, well, if he's looking into me and I didn't do it, maybe B wasn't the target, and maybe the shuttle driver is. So in this day and age, we hear about police officers, usually under two sets of circumstances. The one that gets the most press, always, is if police officers have done something bad. Otherwise, we hear about police officers when they've been killed on duty. In this case, in Collateral Damage, you're going to meet police officers from multi-jurisdictions, and they're all doing their jobs, trying to make sure that the bad guy doesn't have a chance to kill again. While I was writing that book, it seemed to go at a glacial pace. And I thought, this one for sure, they're gonna want their money back. But my old editor had taken her BlackBerry and retired, and now I had a new editor. So when I turned in the manuscript, nothing happened, because a week after I turned it in, she got married, and then she went on her honeymoon, and I didn't get my editorial letter back from the publisher for a good 6 weeks. And that was 6 weeks that I was away from the book. And when it came back, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was. I just had to be away from it for a while. And so when the first review came out from Library Journal, and they said, another fast-paced thriller from J.A. Jance, I thought, okay, I did it. It's gonna be fine. But the whole time I was working on that book, there was I was thinking, maybe I've lost my mojo. Maybe I just can't do this. Maybe this is the last book I'll ever write, because I won't be able to do it again. But while I was working on that book, something happened. I have a friend, his name is Loretta. She lives in Oregon. And I met her because her husband, Randy, a Vietnam vet, was dying of Agent Orange brain cancer. And somebody had to stay up and watch Randy every night, because he'd get up and go wandering outside. So they were at the VA hospital, and there was one of those free to good home book carts, and Loretta grabbed a book off the cart, and it was one of my books. And she read it. And people have told me for years, reading my books is like eating Fritos, because you can't read just one. And that was the case with Loretta. She became a fan. And then she saw my email address on my website. And on those long nights when she was keeping vigil at Randy's bedside, she sent me emails. And I was the only one she could talk to in the middle of the night. So she poured out her heart to me, and over time, we became friends. She had always wanted to be a police or fire chaplain. And after Randy's death, she actually did go to school and get her chaplaincy certificate. But before she had that, what she did in the past was volunteer in hospitals. And because she volunteered in hospitals. Okay, so in the 90s, there was a killer who roamed the West riding freight trains. And he did hate crimes before hate crimes were a thing. And his hate crime of choice was to push Native American people under moving trains. I actually, yesterday, he used other weapons as well. Yesterday, I met a woman who said her niece was 9 years old when she met the boxcar killer, and he slit her neck from side to side. But she, at 9 years old, he missed the carotid arteries, and she played dead and survived the attack. But there was a guy from a Sioux, a full-blooded Sioux, who was, his name was James. He was the child of an unwed mother. He was given out for adoption, raised by, I'm sure, well-meaning Anglo parents who tried to rub every smidgen of Native American experience out of his life. He finally grew up. He was working for the railroad in a rail yard in some small city in Oregon when he encountered the boxcar killer. And the guy pushed him under a train. He was dragged for 1.5 miles before the engineer was able to get the train stopped. The cops showed up. They pronounced him dead. They zipped him into a body bag and had him hauled away to the morgue, which was in the basement of the local hospital. One of the nurses, it was a small enough city that one of the nurses on duty knew the guy by name and knew he was of Sioux descent. So when she got off her shift that night, she went down to the morgue to wash his hair, which is a long-standing Sioux tradition. When she unzipped the body bag, his arm came out because he wasn't dead. He went directly from the morgue to the OR, where he underwent the first of countless surgeries. Eventually, he was airlifted to Portland for more surgeries. He lost the use of his dominant hand. He had to learn to use his left hand. He ended up a paraplegic. He had to learn to speak again. He had to learn to write and read again. And while he was relearning how to read, he encountered my friend Loretta, because she came to his room and read books to him. And because she was a fan of my books, she read my books to him. And because her favorite book was the first of the Walker books, Hour of the Hunter, she read that to him. Once James recovered enough, he spent the next 20 years of his life working with disadvantaged disaffected Native American urban youth. The kids, the urban youth, Indian kids who were sort of screwed up and living in Portland, trying to help them get back on the right path. He died in the summer of 2021. But the last time he saw Loretta, he said, "Tell your friend she needs to write more Walker books. There aren't enough Indian heroes." So that, there were some rules in Evie Busk's household. One of them was, for dinner you have a little bit of everything, and everything on your plate, and no dessert until your plate is clean. The way that translates into my writing world is, I'm not allowed to think about the next book until I clean my plate of the one I'm working on. So the whole time I was working on Collateral Damage, that idea was sitting in the back of my head. So when I finally finished all the writing and all the editorial work, it was time to turn my attention to the next book. And I knew, the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women is big news in the world these days. I've known about it for a long time. In fact, in Hour of the Hunter, the first Walker book, the young woman who is murdered, Gina Antone, her murder is eventually solved, but the killer got little more than a slap on the wrist. Well, he did get some more than a slap on the wrist because Diana Ladd hit him in the face with a frying pan full of bacon grease. That sort of fixed him. But as far as the legal system was concerned, he really didn't get what he deserved. So I knew that the next Walker book would be about a task force, a federal task force working on missing and murdered Indigenous girls. And the likely candidate to be the main protagonist in that was Brandon Walker's son-in-law. Oh, why is his name falling out of my head? Does she really write these books? Dan Pardee, I remember now. Sometimes I forget my kid's name. There you are. And I knew it would have something to do, I needed a title. And I knew the title would have something to do with lost girls. But the Walker book titles have a certain cadence. Hour of the Hunter, Kiss of the Bees, Dance of the Bones, Day of the Dead. And so I needed a title that fit into that, but they're also a little ironic because you don't think of bees kissing and you don't think of bones dancing. So what did I do? I went to my literary engineer, the guy in the right-hand seat, and I said, I need a title for the next Walker book. And it's going to be about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and it's going to be called, it's something to do with the lost girls. And he thought about it for maybe 10 minutes, and he said, how about Blessing of the Lost Girls? Bingo! I started writing the next day, and I wrote that book from beginning to end in 2 months flat. So I have my mojo back. And I'm working on the next Beaumont book right now. But that book was so much fun to write. It's due out in September. And even if you haven't ever read a Walker book, I know there are some people who think, one of these days she's going to get over the Walker books. And I haven't gotten over them because those books, they're not like writing a book. They're more like weaving a book or French braiding a book because there are multiple points of view interwoven with the legends and stories of the Tohono O'odham people. And you'll learn things about the desert, you'll learn things about the people who have lived here for thousands of years that you never knew before by reading that book. When I write those books, there was a linguist on the reservation when I was a teacher there. His kids were all in school, and so I knew all his kids better than I knew Dean Saxton. But he was there with a project creating a then Papago English dictionary. Years later, the Papagos took back their original name, the Desert People, Tohono O'odham, and it's now the Tohono O'odham English dictionary. And when I write those books, I have that dictionary. It's got coffee stains on it, it's a mess, but I use it all the time, at my side. So one of the stories I wanted to weave into this book was how we got 4 seasons, because all of nature goes in 4s. And it's the story of these 4 quarrelsome boys who all want to have their own way with the weather, and 4 brothers. So I got spring, I got summer, I got to autumn, looked at my dictionary, no word. I thought, well, Dean Saxon, you just let me down. So I called the reservation. Nobody there knew a word for autumn until autumn. And then I have a Pima down on the Salt River Reservation, whose daughter's name is White Fawn, and he loves my books, and she sent me an email. So I sent White Fawn a message and said, he wanted to know how I had learned all those Tohono O'odham words, and I told him straight out I had learned them from the dictionary. So I wrote to White Fawn and I asked her, what's the word for autumn? And he said, there isn't one. That surprised me, but I guess if you live in the desert, summer just keeps on until suddenly it's winter. But I've learned a lot in writing those books, and I think my readers appreciate learning them as well. Okay, I will apologize for my croaking. I sound like a lifetime smoker. I am not. I've had a sore throat for a number of days, and I had my negative COVID test yesterday. That was terrifying. I'm supposed, 2 days from now, at Left Coast Crime down in Tucson, I'm supposed to be given a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's a good thing they need to give that to people before they croak out. And I thought, if I come down with COVID, that'll really piss me off if I miss that. But I have this throat. I'm 78 years old, I still have my tonsils, maybe I have tonsillitis. So I went to urgent care, and I was told last night that there is a viral sore throat going around, and my throat hurts. I caught it from someplace, so it's probably contagious, and if you are somebody who's susceptible to anything, just wave at me when it comes to signing. Don't come up and have your picture taken and so forth. But I apologize for my throat this morning, and I'm sorry I'm not doing better. My husband, when he worked for California Eastern Labs, he had a secretary who was Gloria Gray. She always had California Eastern Laboratories, and I think I sound just like her. I'm going to ask a question here. Something wonderful happened to me yesterday in Apache Junction. How many people in this room recognize the name Rusty Warren? Ha. typical of you. Well, at the University of Arizona, in Pima Hall, our castle tall, where various dreams come true, and believe me, mine did, I was impeached as the song leader for teaching the girls body songs at dinner. And the one that really got Mrs. Van Skyke's hackles up was, roll me over in the clover, roll me over, lay me down and do it again. She really took exception to that. But that was a Rusty Warren original. And at the end of Clawback, when Allie's long-term major domo is retiring and returning to the UK to care for his recently found long-lost partner, they're at the airport and Allie is about to puddle up and he tells her, knockers up. And that is Rusty Warren's catchphrase, because it means shape up, pull yourself together, put your shoulders back, and move on. Well, that was in the book, and someone sent that book to Rusty Warren, who was living in retirement in Hawaii. So she sent me an email, and I sent her an autographed copy of Clawback with the page, with my autograph on the page with those words. Rusty passed away sometime during the last 3 years, and her long-term assistant inherited her catalog of music. And yesterday, she showed up at Apache Junction with a 45 record of Roll Me Over in the Clover. I have no idea where I can find a 45 record player to play it. So I'll probably have to have it framed and hang it someplace in the house. But that's almost as much of a treasure to me as being able to call Janice Ian my friend. I don't know if I could do that today. I was 6 feet tall in 7th grade. I was smart. I wore thick glasses. And if that isn't a recipe for social disaster in high school and at junior high, I don't know what is. And so as soon as I heard Janice Ian's song at 17, I thought, whoa, she and I have walked in the same moccasins. Except I didn't know that Janice Ian is only 4'10". When we're together, she barely comes up to my elbow. But I often end my presentations by singing that song. So in 2008, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at a writers' conference in Boise, Idaho. And I had agreed to do that the year before. Then in May of that year, my husband's bilateral knee surgery that was supposed to happen in August suddenly got moved up to June. And he was going to be getting out of the hospital and going to rehab the very weekend I was supposed to be in Idaho. So I told my daughters, I said, okay, I'm just gonna call the writer conference. I'm going to tell them my husband is in the hospital and I won't be able to come. And they said, Mom, you promised. We'll look after Dad. You keep your word. Doesn't it annoy you? When suddenly your kids are spouting back the words you taught them. So muttering under my breath, I went to Boise, and after my keynote speech, I finished with Janice's song. I got back home Sunday night, I opened my computer, and there was an email from Janice Ian. She said, hey, I heard you sang my song in Boise on Saturday and that you did a good job of it. It turns out someone who was a fan of my work and Janice Ian's work got back home to Nashville and tattled on me. And that's how Janice Ian and I became friends. And actually, a few years ago in Tampa, we actually sang that song together as a duet. That wasn't very easy because at that point, Janice still had her full range. And she said, Judy, you sing in the key of R. In August of last year, Janice Ian was due to do a concert in Seattle, to which I had tickets. And several weeks before, she went to see the doctor, and she has problems with her vocal cords, and so her singing career is over. And we've been in touch back and forth since then a lot. But today, in Janice Ian's honor, and really in the key of R, I'd like to close with her song. I learned the truth at 17, that love was meant for beauty queens and high school girls with clear-skinned smiles who married young and then retired. The Valentines I never knew, the Friday night charades of youth were spent on ones more beautiful. At 17, I learned the truth. And those of us with ravaged faces, lacking in the social graces, desperately remained at home, inventing lovers on the phone, who called to say, come dance with me, and murmur vague obscenities at ugly girls like me. At 17, a brown-eyed girl in hand-me-downs, whose name I never could pronounce, said, pity please the ones who serve, they only get what they deserve. The rich relation, hometown queen, marries into what she needs, with a guarantee of company, haven for the elderly. Remember those who win the game, lose the love they sought to gain, in debentures of quality and dubious integrity. The small town eyes will gape at you in dull surprise when payment due exceeds accounts received. At 17, for those of us who learned the game of Valentines that never came, for those whose names were never called when choosing sides for basketball. We all played the game, and when we dare, we cheat ourselves at solitaire, inventing lovers on the phone, repenting other lives unknown, called to say, come dance with me, and murmur vague obscenities at ugly girls like me. At 17, it was long ago and far away. The world was younger than today, and dreams were all they gave for free to ugly duckling girls like me. And thanks to all of you, all of my dreams have come true.
I know, I told you. When I came in. Oh, yeah.
Joe? Yeah. You're never regular retired. You're fantastic.